Welcome. I'm Kinetic Symphony. I hunt down and report on mysterious and weird true stories, from glitches to the paranormal. This is my weekly compendium for the week ending Monday, November 8th, 2021. Case file number 372, written by Anonymous. A near-death experience on the road and a family of creepy dolls without faces. I'll try to keep this quick, but that's unlikely. This happened in 2016, a combination of a near-death story with a glitch I can't explain. Me and two friends, 16 and 18 male, were hanging out on a Friday night with not much to do. No drinking or drugs involved. We decided to take my friend's recent hand-me-down car for a cruise on some popular driving roads in the mountains. The car was manual, and the owner and my other friend had very little experience driving standard, so I was the driver. The trip into the mountains was uneventful, and we pulled over and switched drivers a few times so they could get the hang of manual. On the third switch, my friend with zero manual experience hops in and gets it moving. He stalls it a few times and the clutch starts getting hot. He can't get it moving again, so we go to switch again. As we are getting out of the car, all three of us notice a life-size family of dolls standing at the edge of the road about 40 feet away at the end of a driveway. A father, mother, and two kids, 3.5 to 5.5 feet tall, wearing clothes from what looked like the 1800s. They were all holding hands and angled in our direction, but they had no faces, just blank, round, white heads, nothing painted on, and no facial features. This sufficiently freaked us out, so we hopped in the car and started racing out of there. This is where the glitch part comes in. As we're speeding out, I go around a right turn that has a 30-mile-per-hour limit. As I'm halfway through the turn, I realize we're going 70 miles per hour, and the car starts sliding. I countersteer. The car swings one way, then back the other way, then once more in the other direction. The car comes to a stop perpendicular to the road, a foot from the edge of the cliff, and facing a large, 30 feet tall times 80 feet long, white retaining wall. We drive slowly in silence the rest of the way home and go to sleep. 2 days later, I worked up the courage to go check the area out during daytime. The dolls weren't there, and the location of the driveway seems to have changed almost a half mile. I knew it was the same one based on the VW Vanagon they had parked at the top. Weird, but maybe I was too freaked out to notice where we were that night, despite clear landmarks. I'd driven the road countless times, so it was an uneasy feeling. Next, I went looking for where the car slid out. I managed to find the turn and identified the same 30-mile-per-hour sign. I saw the tire tracks from our car, but when I followed them to where they stopped, there was absolutely no retaining wall there. Very, very confused now. I drove up the road another 3/4 of a mile, and there's the exact same retaining wall I remember seeing directly in front of us that night, with no tire marks in front of it. I have no idea how these locations changed. It took me a long time to think of it as a glitch in the Matrix. If I didn't have another two people with me, I'd think I was completely insane, but they remember seeing the same things in the same places as I did. I feel like our brains could have omitted some things, as is common with certain trauma, but for all three of us to experience the same thing is still odd. That's all. I've told this story over the years. Some people think I'm crazy, some don't. I still have no idea what happened that night, but I'm still alive, as far as I know, so it's all good in my book. Case notes. So this was only briefly touched on, but those dolls being there is very creepy. It almost reminds me of the weeping statues in Doctor Who. Of course, in this case, they weren't following you if you shut your eyes, but damn, that is just ominous, isn't it? And yet you survived, so maybe it wasn't ominous. Maybe somehow this was a signal of a guardian angel, changing the very landscape that night for you and your friends so you wouldn't crash into anything. I don't know what to make of those dolls. Case file number 373, written by Goofball John McGee, Seiko brand watches and a glitch. Short story happened a year ago. My girlfriend and I were in the local mall for a quick errand when we passed by this famous watch boutique there. They had a poster of the newest Seiko dive watch. This piqued my interest because not many stores stock Seiko here. So naturally I asked my girlfriend if we could go in for 5 minutes. We did. I tried on a couple of watches, I didn't like the collection so much, and the sales rep told me to check next week because they're adding newer ranges as and when they get cleared by customs. She cited the virus that shall not be named and all that. I agreed and we walked out of the store. The store was empty, and that's not very uncommon because there were several social distancing guidelines for that mall. As well, the boutique itself has mid to high-end brands. Now here's the kicker. We were near the mall 8 to 10 days later, and we decided to check if they had other models, but they vehemently denied that they ever carried Seiko. I felt like I was crazy. I said there was a poster outside and everything. The manager said there may be a chance it was another branch, but to his knowledge, the boutique itself doesn't stock Seiko, no matter the branch. Dumbfounded, I emailed their head office, and even they told me the same thing. My girlfriend and I spoke about it, and we just couldn't explain it. What the hell did I try on? And where? Case file number 374, written by the Jorge, a lock of hair out of place. I, 30 female, was doing my hair the other day. I pulled it into a ponytail and realized a lock of hair behind my ear had fallen out of the ponytail. It was resting kind of awkwardly on my shoulder, as though it had fallen perfectly vertically and piled on my shoulder. So I let my hair down and put it into a new ponytail, leaving the old ponytail holder on my wrist. I was looking in the mirror in my bedroom the whole time. It's also worth noting that I'm prior military and still wear my hair in military regulation when I'm going to work, to keep it out of my face, so it was tight and clean. I double-checked that it was in place and walked not even 5 steps into the bathroom to get hairspray. I got to the bathroom and caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. The same exact lock of hair was down behind my ear, resting on my shoulder in the same way. I just stared at myself in the mirror, wondering if I had actually fixed it or if I had gotten distracted, but the old ponytail holder was still on my wrist. It was just so strange. It's been at least 3 days, and I keep thinking about what it looked like. It was like someone had messed up the animation in a game. Bonus file, written by Stenathan. This entity was strong. He must be lifting. Just to preface the story, I've never had any experiences like this before or since. I would like to find some rational explanation for it all, but to this point I have not been able to. Even thinking about this house brings back the same helpless fear I experienced back then. I was about 16 years old when my family purchased a fixer-upper home in a relatively nice neighborhood. By no means was it a dump, but it certainly needed work. Upon moving in, we were informed the house had in the past served as a home healthcare facility for the elderly. There were no strange feelings about it. Our family was quite excited to have a new home to start fresh. My father and I began by ripping up all the flooring and laying new tile throughout, knocking out some walls, redoing the kitchen counters, etc. Next was the backyard. It was basically just a dirt lot with a little porch. On the porch was a laundry room, a tiny little shed near the back door. The first strange thing we noticed was that there were multiple locks on it. The odd part was that the locks were on the inside of the laundry room. The door was rather heavy. I don't believe it was wood, but it was a dense material. On the inside of that door was a tiny child-sized handprint. Not in paint or dust, but it was impressed into the door. This baffled us for the longest time. My brother and I began tearing up the yard, getting ready to seed it, and my brother hit something hard that made a ding sound. We kept dinging around until we decided to pause. We didn't want a massive hole in the yard. My father's curiosity got the best of him, and he decided we would dig until we unearthed whatever it was. We dug a massive hole and discovered an entire twin bed frame, black and rusty. In addition, we found several small plastic children toys, many of which appeared to be partially melted. This officially gave us all the creeps. Over the next few months, strange things started to happen. Our 2 dogs would stand and stare down the hallway, growling and barking with their hair on end. Every time this would happen, we would all pause and watch. This became more frequent until they began going into my room at the end of the hall and repeating this, staring into my closet. This was obviously unnerving, but ultimately decided there was nothing to worry about. They were just being good boys. Sometime later, I remember waking up in the middle of the night and feeling an extremely dark, oppressive feeling, like I was being watched. I sat up and looked around the room, and there was nothing, but the fear and the energy was paralyzing. I am roughly 17 at this time, and I began sleeping with my head under my covers. Every now and then, I would wake up in the middle of the night, and that feeling of being watched persisted. That fear was so heavy, I wouldn't even look above my comforter, fearing I would see something large and ominous staring back. I told my father about this, and although he believed me, there was nothing to be done about it. A few months later, that all came to a head when I awoke to someone shouting my name in the deepest, raspiest voice. I jumped out of my bed and flew to my door at light speed. I threw it open to find my entire family staring back from their respective bedroom doors. "Who the hell screamed my name?" I said. Everyone just stared at each other, visibly shaken, and stated they all heard their names screamed as well. Things intensified from there. Things moving or being knocked off of shelves. In the movies, it's always something small, only noticed by someone alone, but in our case, it was always on full display for whoever was there. My brother's football team was over one day, in the living room eating and playing Xbox while my dad cooked, when several items on the top of our entertainment center went flying several feet. This was not the case of the items rolling off of an uneven surface. These were signed baseballs and footballs flying off and hitting the wall. These football players took off running through the front door. By this point, my family had grown used to the strange happenings, and after standing there taking it all in, we picked up the items and went about our day. The next significant event was when my dad's friends were over, sitting on the couch. These were not tiny people, rather heavy set. All three on the couch, when in mid-conversation, the couch moved several inches to the left, screeching across the floor quickly. This startled me, and I jumped. I have never seen anyone move as fast as those three people on the couch. You would have thought we had ejector seats on that couch. A short time later, I was coming home from work in the early evening. I pulled into the carport and saw the door was wide open. I knew immediately something was off. I apprehensively peeked in and saw the back door was also open. I walked in and immediately felt a feeling of dread as I looked around and saw every door, cabinet, and drawer in the kitchen wide open. Thinking of myself as a tough guy, I grabbed a knife and decided to search the home while yelling out for my family or whatever potential intruder may be there. When I got to that dark hallway and stared down it, I knew something wasn't right. The fear overshadowed whatever courage I thought I had, and I ran out and called my father. They were out walking the dogs. They ran home and saw everything was open. We searched the home, but no one was there. Things got very dark in our home. Everyone was always angry and fighting. Families have issues, but this was constant, almost inexplicably so when looking back on it. I started having these moments where I was like daydreaming, but deeper and more vivid. I couldn't hear people around me. It was like being somewhere else. Finally, one day, a girlfriend of mine was over. I was sitting there on the edge of my bed, staring into my closet where I had my entertainment center, when I dozed off into one of those daydreams. I saw my girlfriend take my phone and walk it into my dining room where my family was sitting and sat it behind my dad's records to prank me. When I snapped to, I stood up casually, walked to the dining room, moved the records, and grabbed my phone. My girlfriend and the entire family stood there with their jaws on the floor. "How did you know where that was?" I started saying, "Well, I saw her put it there." As I said this, I started to realize how bizarre that sounded, and started to feel freaked out now, seeing them stare at me like a crazy person. I just walked out of the door, started my car, and went on a date. That came up several times, and to this day, I don't like talking about it. It was too strange. There were many more events. These were just the highlights. I was glad when they sold that house. Whatever the explanation for all of these things, they were creepy as hell. If you're enjoying this video, consider giving it a like. Now on to the next story. Case file number 375, written by Relatively Funkadelic. A mystery in the Big Bend National Park. I've been searching for some semblance of similarity in someone else's encounter for 3 years now, hoping another's experience might align even a little bit with my own to validate it. Until last night, I'd found details aligning with my own encounter, but nothing I felt was concrete enough to make my story not sound absolutely batshine insane. It still does sound insane, I know, and have no way to further explain any of it, so all I have is what I witnessed. I found a post on here from 18 days ago that sounds eerily similar to my own, the key difference being the familiarity of the voices mimicked, leading me to wonder if this thing had been watching us for a while. To get both of our voices down, it would have to have heard us at the most recent, 10 hours earlier before we had left for work. I've been wanting to write this since it happened in 2018, 2019, but I legitimately get really uncomfortable the moment I start. I'm sure the thing isn't actually watching or whatever, but I don't know. I just hate retelling it, honestly. I think it's important to share, though, because finding someone else's story led me to finding several others that seemed to align with whatever I saw, and it was honestly so cathartic. I figured maybe somebody else might be in the same boat and needs some sort of validation that they aren't insane. I was living down in West Texas in this national park where the restaurant I was working at the time rested at the top of a 15-minute hike up a mountain trail from the housing they had us in. I closed up the restaurant after everyone left each night, so I was always an hour or two later coming down the hill than everyone else. Usually pretty empty, really quiet, uncommon to encounter anyone else, as the only thing at the top of the mountain is the closed restaurant, gift shop, store, and some of the trailheads. There isn't much reason for anyone else to be on the trail at that hour. And this one freaking night, I'm coming down, no moon, so it was pitch black, empty trail, characteristically quiet. I rounded this last bend to get to my house, and right before I got off the trail to take a shortcut through the thicket of cactus and brush, there were maybe 15 to 20 trees. Even though it's a desert, the top of the mountain has a high Sierra microclimate. When I hear my best friend / roommate call out my name, clear as day, in the other direction. He said my name, and when I turned, said it again. In retrospect, it sounded funny. It was close, 15 yards away maybe, but it sounded far off at the same time. Like if someone recorded his voice from far away, but played it very nearby. It just sounded off, but not enough to flip a switch immediately. And maybe I'm painting the memory of it differently than it actually sounded. So I'm facing my house, maybe 50 yards away, and the voice comes from directly to my left, on this foothill of the mountain we'd like to hike around sometimes. It was much more tree coverage than the trail I was on, and considerably more than a thicket separating me from the clearing surrounding my house. If you walked 5 feet in the direction the voice came from, you'd completely disappear from the view of anyone on the trail or on the back porch of the house, immediately. Hearing my friend's voice calling me over, I was like, oh, cool. We're night hiking, and I turned to follow it. But right before I take my first step into the tree line, I hear his actual voice down on our porch saying, "Hey, who are you talking to?" Which stops me. I turn back to face my house, confused as hell, just in time to see this freaking thing burst out of the freaking thicket I was just about to shortcut through to begin with, before hearing the first voice and turning away. And from the exact spot I had walked down every single night, this freaking thing bolts. It was humanoid technically, but the thing is tall as hell and way too skinny for a human, like at least 8 feet tall but slim. It looked inhumanly slender. He was hunched over and running like he had just burst off a track mark, but kept that same form the whole time, never got all the way upright. Okay, so as for the color, that has always messed with me, because for one, I'm colorblind as hell, and it was like a greenish, yellowish thing, and I get greens and yellows mixed up a lot. At least for this hue of green and yellow. And for two, it looked like it was giving off its own glow, which has always sounded so absolutely ludicrous. I never tell anyone that I do not absolutely trust them to give me the benefit of the doubt before thinking that I'm completely making it up. Because if I heard this story, I would honestly think someone at the very least is exaggerating. Our back porch light was on though, and the thing lined up with where it could have been shining on it. So if this thing was translucent, it definitely could have taken on that sheen by reflecting the porch light. The colors do line up, I guess. If you'd reflected the light, it may have looked like this thing's color, but it certainly wasn't identical. Honestly though, I swear it had its own shine to it. Like looking at a glow stick that's dying. More than enough to see, but kinda faint. Regardless, it was a light that definitely wasn't there a second before, when I'd gotten to the shortcut. It would have stuck out for the last 50 yards of the walk, at least. It should be noted, had I followed that thing's voice, 2 things would have happened. 1, I would have completely disappeared from the view of anyone, and 2, I would have turned my back on whatever that thing was and entered into the thicket of trees, weeds, and cactus, far too dense for me to turn around, run, fight back, anything. That trail I would have gone towards leads directly to the edge of a cliff that drops down into a massive break in the mountain. The Window in Big Bend National Park that cleanly drops all of the 6,000 feet to the wide open desert below. That could be the purpose of that direction. To be honest, if I was going to try to do something nefarious, it would be the perfect place to both find someone and lead them quickly to a spot where no one else would come up on you. Legitimately, in the middle of the day, you could probably make someone disappear over there if you wanted to. Anyway, how this thing was running, it immediately felt like I had freaking spooked it. Like how a deer runs off at a noise. But this was different in that it seemed a lot more determined. It seemed intelligent, aware of its own movement, not just acting out of instinct. Kinda like spooking a person if they'd been watching you from the bushes or something, you know? Like it spooked but sentient. And definitely acting like I'd just foiled some nefarious plan. So naturally, I also freaking bolt, exposing my back to this thing, but taking the opposite, slightly longer way back to my porch. My freaking buddy, God bless his soul, is still there when I make it, and he asks again, "Who are you with?" His face is just confused as hell, and he keeps looking past me, and I'm like, "You heard it too, right?" And he says, "Yeah, where are they?" And I was like, What? There were multiple?" Apparently, from his perspective, he had heard multiple voices alongside my own, all carrying on and joking around, talking back and forth pretty loudly. He said there were at least 3 other voices talking to mine, but that it sounded like a whole crowd coming down the trail. He said he could clearly hear us getting closer and closer for the past few minutes, and just assumed I'd run into a hiking group and talked with them as we headed down. Not the most uncommon thing in the daytime, but pretty uncommon for the hour of night. It took me a minute to show him that I wasn't messing with him and had not just split off from a group of hikers. I was completely alone and had not vocalized a word until he came up to ask, "Who are you with?" It took a second to even express my side of what was going on. I was so out of whack I couldn't find the words to actually explain it, so I just kept shouting, "I swear to God, I just heard your voice, and then this freaking thing, dude, this thing," or something similar to that. Eventually, it registers that there were no other lights on the trail. I wasn't using a flashlight that night, so maybe there was actually some moon out, and I had just heard his voice calling me off trail and into the dark, and we both began trying to figure out what the hell we'd just witnessed. Okay, this part might be a little crazy, but I'm not implying anything, I'm just saying. This is what I'd been doing on the walk down before this happened. So obviously walking home solo, I hadn't actually said a word. Whoever he heard was certainly not me, and I certainly didn't come with a crowd, but I had been praying like crazy on the hike down. There had just been this super dark, negative energy in the house lately, and I was just trying to kinda surround myself with light and positivity, asking God to give me strength before I walked back in. And out of nowhere, midway through the trail, I got this absolutely overwhelming joy, like absolute ecstasy. I was screaming inside, happy as bones, and just felt like I could take on the whole freaking world. No matter what came, I could take it. Maybe I am implying something, because call me crazy, but I've always felt like that had something to do with how the night turned out, as opposed to how it maybe would have. I don't know. I know that part really does make me sound insane, but so does the rest of it, so whatever. I certainly don't think it was a coincidence. I'm just not sure what to make of it. Every detail means every detail. That's just what's going on with your boy as the walk was happening. It would have been a noteworthy and memorable night had the thing not done any of this. It was that powerful of an energy. That's pretty much it. The only other thing is memories of it. Out of nowhere, I just sort of stopped thinking of it. Not like I forgot, but like it was hidden behind a thick fog in my head. The next morning, I told the story to a friend, and she uncharacteristically shut me down and just said something like, "Y'all are just crazy and getting scared of these mountains," and just walked away. It really was not like her to just dismiss someone, especially a friend, without even hearing him out. She was a real empathetic lady. It was like she just heard something that triggered a memory she refused to touch, and shut it down before it got too close. I could be reading it, but that's happened a couple of times with this story. And anyway, we'd been living on that mountain on and off for a few years at that point, and had never once heard or seen anything remotely similar to that thing. Until that night, We'd never even heard a story even vaguely resembling that. It just wasn't like we got spooked by our own house or the trail we took twice a day, every day. And it wasn't like we were seeing and hearing things based on stories we'd projected into the darkness, you know? But the weirdest freaking thing happened the moment she walked away. It was like a freaking fog just slowly poured over the memory, and the last time I remember thinking of it was that moment, and then it just freaking disappeared for months. How in the world does something that massive, that frightening, happen in your life and you just stopped thinking about it? And then one day it just popped back up. I was honestly so surprised and unsure of how I hadn't thought of it in so long. It was almost more baffling than anything we actually witnessed. I asked my friend just before I sent this if he'd felt the same fog, and he said, absolutely. He doesn't really like talking about that night, honestly, and he's told me that I cannot help but bring it up as often as possible, hoping by talking it through we'd find some sort of explanation for any of what happened. Even as I typed the message though, I'd felt like I'd asked him a million times already and just forgotten his answer. Maybe I have. That isn't a super uncommon thing to do, I guess. Now that's pretty much everything. I really felt like I needed to convey as absolutely many details as I could possibly remember, just in case someone reading this has any sort of experience with any part of it. A mimic or a humanoid or memory loss, anything. I really don't know what to make of all of this. All I have are the details of that night and my memory of doing something bizarre afterward. I have never known what to make of it, but the other guy's posts from a few weeks back honestly helped me after 3 years of grappling with the experience. Just seeing something that might be similar seems like I've learned as much about it as I honestly feel comfortable knowing. I just figured maybe someone else might be in the same boat and maybe needs to see some sort of validation. Just validation, I guess. Thanks for listening. Case file number 376, written by Beta Brains. To save my dog, something manipulated time. I'll start with this. My dog is fine. I've had a lot of glitches in my life, but this is one of the only ones that had multiple witnesses. I have a smallish dog that gets out of the yard constantly because he's a fox terrier and can dig out of anything. So last summer he gets out and I hear him barking at our neighbors. I go on the porch and he's across the street barking at the grumpy old lady in a housecoat, and she's rolling her eyes at me and I'm embarrassed. So I whistle for my dog and he does the super boost run he always does when he's being sneaky and starts darting across the street. I have this moment, kinda like one of those school math questions when I hear a car show up in my periphery and look at my dog. Then the car, then my dog. Then my brain is like the math meme lady, so I start yelling at him to stay and running towards him, but I just knew he was about to get hit. Almost like a weird precognition moment, because I for sure don't know math. It felt like time actually stopped moving. Seriously, like the X-Men scenes with Quicksilver, and just as I see he's about to collide with the car, I scream. I'm not a screamer, but the scream that came out could have stopped time. It was like a weird sonic boom that made my vision fuzzy. And I see his torso completely run over by the front tire. And then there's this kind of fuzz and almost a click where the same split second happens again, but the car barely grazes him and he keeps running right into the yard. Time gets a little fuzzy because I'm losing my mind, but I open the back door and he comes in perfectly fine minus a small scratch on his eye. I run back out front and the driver and his wife, who is hysterical, are still in the middle of the street and the housecoat lady's jaw is on the ground. And all four of us are looking at each other like, what the hell just happened? The driver's wife is leaning over him, out of the window, in complete disbelief that he's not dead. Both them and the neighbors saw the timeline where he was smashed, but he ran out of the other side fine. I saw both. $400 in x-rays later, the vet says he's perfectly fine. The driver honestly sat outside for like 20 to 30 minutes because they kept having me check to make sure he wasn't internally bleeding. And I'm like, no guys, he's fine. And the driver says how? And honestly, I don't know. Case notes. You know what this makes me think of? It actually makes me think of editing, where you're slicing in different timelines, you're cutting out audio portions, you're moving frames around. It's like splicing things together. You can make it look like something happened for 1 second, one frame, and then you layer on another frame right after, maybe with a cross dissolve, and then you're in a different timeline. It's almost like someone was editing the file of the server in real time to save your dog. Now, why anyone would do that, I don't know. I mean, it's lovely that your dog is safe, but I wonder if, for some reason, he has an important role to play. Be sure to protect him. Case file number 377, written by Caxry of Flame and Time. About 2 to 3 years ago, I remember stopping home from a drive so I could use a bathroom and grab some snacks. It wasn't a particularly long drive, maybe an hour or so, and I wasn't the driver. After stopping home and using the bathroom, I saw a candle in the gallery. It was a tiny candle. I felt the need to light it, so I did. It was hard since it was a small candle. Then, for some reason, I get the idea to spray this perfume on it. I don't know what I expected to happen or why I thought it was even a good idea, but I sprayed the perfume on the flame from the candle and saw an explosion and the candle shattering and felt fire on my skin and clothes surrounding me. I closed my eyes for a second, and then the next thing I knew, I was right back to where I started, an unlit candle. This is one of the only experiences I've had like this. I've had a few similar ones, but I don't remember anything as vividly as this. Has anyone experienced anything similar? Case file number 378, written by Scott and Shadyside. Walmart, Cinnamon Toast Crunch, underwear, and a glitch. I went to visit some friends who live about 3 hours away last weekend. I realized as I was last minute packing that I had no clean underwear. I arrived Friday night and my buddy and I ran to Walmart early Saturday morning. I got a 3-pack of Undies, milk, and Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Narrator's notes. Nice. Went through the self-checkout line. Enjoyed the cereal. Wore the underwear all weekend. End of story. That was until Tuesday when I grabbed my weekend bag to unpack and do laundry. I pulled out the used undies, but dug deeper and found brand new, still rolled up and taped, another pair. Another pair, and another pair, and another pair. Well, that's impossible, because I only got one 3-pack of undies. Where are these coming from? I was stumped, so I messaged my buddy and asked if he could find the packaging or receipt in his trash. He also remembers me getting a 3-pack, because we got a laugh when I flipped the pack and asked him if I'm still an extra large or if my virus weight put me in the higher size bracket. I'm still well into extra large territory. Then I thought, well, let me look at my account and see if I accidentally grabbed a bigger pack, although I'm sure I didn't. The price of cereal and milk is pretty predictable, so let's see what the total was. I look at my account and there's nothing from Walmart. I'm like, huh? So it's been well over a week now and still no back record of the underwear, cereal, or milk purchase, and I'm still baffled at the multiplying underwear, but I'm not complaining either. Bonus file, written by Anonymous. This is Hallowed Ground, says Eminem. Hello. So I stay in an apartment in the city center. I've been having some weird occurrences happen in my home. I've only lived here for just under 2 months. Tonight, I tried Googling the history of where I live after my experiences. I didn't expect to come across anything, but I did. I found out that in 1934, an 8-year-old girl was murdered and hidden in a sack. This happened a few minutes walk down the street. Is it possible it could be this spirit in my apartment? I'll let you know of some of the things that happened. 1. I dropped a hair clip on my bathroom floor, but couldn't find it anywhere after dropping it. I searched everywhere and even shook off the bathroom mat a few good times with no luck. Fast forward an hour or two and I go back into the bathroom. The hair clip is sat right on the bathroom mat like it had been there the whole time. 2. I was making dinner and using my microwave. It's the old style one where it's a dial and not digital to set the time. Well, my thing in the microwave was done and it dinged. I went and sat in the living room next to the kitchen and ate for around 10 minutes. All of a sudden, the microwave was on. I went back into the kitchen and it was turned on for 2 minutes. 3. The other night I was in a separate room and I heard this loud whistling. I thought it was my partner, so I went to ask if they were whistling a song. Turns out they weren't. 4. Last night I went to bed and was laying down for around an hour. My partner was still in the office and I heard music playing. I went through to ask them to turn it down, but then realized it was actually coming from the living room. The Alexa, which I haven't used in a good 2 weeks, was playing Guns A-Blazing by Eminem from the album Music to Be Murdered By. One of the lyrics being, "Just don't forget who you're messing with when stepping on hallowed ground." Safe to say I freaked myself out, and it's now 1 a.m. I guess I'll try and sleep. Bonus file, written by No, Those Are Beans, when your customer is very weird, maybe even possessed. I am 22 female, a shipped shopper, and mostly work nights because that's when most orders are available, and I generally only accept orders in the zone closest to my home. One night, I decided I wanted to do one last order with the delivery window between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m., but there weren't any available in my usual zone, so I figured I'd just pick up one on the other side of town to close out my day. During my shop, there were lots of things on this customer's list that were out of stock, and he had specified on his account that he'd like to be contacted in that situation. I was shopping for him for about 30 to 40 minutes and sent him probably 10 different texts about things that needed substitutes. I did not receive an answer until I was ready to check out, and had reached out to him one last time, letting him know that's what was happening. He finally told me to just use my best judgment, to which I replied, no problem. Fast forward to having all his items bagged and in my car. I sent him a text letting him know I'm heading his way and that I'll be there in about 15 minutes, as I do for all my customers. I get to a street and it already is in the best part of town, which I didn't know before I accepted the order because I hadn't been over that way since I lived where I do now. And I'm thinking, okay, no problem, just make it a quick drop off and get back home. When I get to the house, the driveway is completely on the left side of the house and there's a porch only to the right corner that leads to the front door. So I can't see the door from the driveway, and nobody could see that I was in the driveway if they were at the door. I can see that there are multiple porch lights as well as lights around the house leading up to the door, but none of them are turned on. Now mind you, I have told this person I was on my way, gave him my estimated timeline, and pressed a button in the shipped app to notify him that I arrived. At this point, I'm feeling a knot in my stomach and my hair is standing up a little bit. Before I got out of my car, I sent a text to my boyfriend, whom I live with, telling him I was feeling really uncomfortable about the situation and the house was creeping me out, and if he didn't hear from me telling him I was on my way home, then something is wrong. This person ordered a lot of stuff and it was just me doing the delivery, so it took me 3 separate trips to the porch and back to my car to get everything out. I grabbed as much as I could for the first trip, went to the porch to get the groceries by the door, and went back to my car for the next load without knocking and making minimal noise. When I got to the porch to drop off my second load, I got up to the second step before looking up to make sure I could see where I was going in the dark, and realized the front door was now open and there was a man standing there staring at me. He also didn't turn any lights on in his house aside from what looked like a single light fixture 3 rooms away, so there was just a faint back glow behind him, and I could only see his silhouette, none of his face or even what he was wearing. Shocked, I just blurted out, "Hello, how are you?" And he stood there and said nothing. Didn't reach for the bags, just looked at me. I dropped his bags off, went back to my car to get the last of the groceries, and didn't even make it up all the porch steps before dropping his groceries and turning around to run back to my car because the man was still just standing in the doorway looking at me. I didn't get tipped on that order, but I'd like to consider the fact that I made it home that night my tip. Needless to say, I haven't shopped in that area again since. Case file number 379, written by Bella Yesil. Tomatoes galore. Evermore? Okay, this is weird. There's a lot of tomato bushes in our little garden area, and they're taking over. So my mom killed some of it and took all the tomatoes off of them, made pickles with green ones, and we ate the rest. The bushes were thrown to the other side where it's an empty lot except for stuff growing. I was strictly against it because they're still giving tomatoes even though it's getting cold, but it's mom's garden, so I let it go. So far so good. It happened a week or so ago. This morning while I was asleep, mom yelled my name asking me why the hell I replanted the tomatoes. I didn't. But when I went outside, the bushes were back with tomatoes all ripe on them. They weren't there yesterday. I pointed out that even if I replanted them, they literally cannot grow tomatoes and ripen them overnight. And the bushes were all brown due to not being planted for a week or so. But these ones, they're not brown. They're green and huge. So she tells me to clean them up, went to work, and I clean up the bushes again and take all the tomatoes on them. I went inside and pickles were there. But now we have more tomatoes than ever, and they came out of nowhere. I ate like 10 of them while collecting them. My mother saw the bushes. I saw the bushes. Hell, I derooted, or whatever the word is, all the bushes again. I don't know if it was a glitch or something else. And now, after 2 hours, I went to the refrigerator to eat the tomatoes I collected at 7 a.m., and they're gone. The bushes are thrown where they were a week before, and all brown and dead. I called my mother, and she has a memory of calling me outside, but she says it's because the weather was great. She doesn't remember the new bushes with the ripened tomatoes overnight. She says that I went out, did some stretching with her in the clean, beautiful weather, and went back to bed. Is she messing with me? Even if she did, I still have the smell of tomatoes on my hands. What happened here? I'm confused, and I worked hard for my tomatoes. There's no one at home that could have eaten them, as I'm alone. I'm kinda mad and upset. I was going to make tomato soup and a salad. I had dreams and hopes, and now my tomatoes are just gone. Case file number 380, written by Volar Records. Momentary flashes of nothingness. I've been attracted to UFOs, paranormal, and esoteric stuff since I was younger. I'm now in my early 40s, which is its own weirdness for me. So basically since the unsolved mystery days, during the virus, out of work with nothing but time to think and read on my hands, Reddit has become a bigger thing to me than before, especially the subs relating to UFO/UAP stuff and general weirdness, and animal displays of intelligence. This sub caught my attention a few months ago, and I started going down the rabbit hole of interesting patterns in people's stories. Granted, everything here is anecdotal, so there's always a massive grain of salt. But as with UFO and paranormal experiences, I feel like there are too many seemingly innocuous instances of weirdness for them to all be made up. Like today's story of the server seating people twice, and then being told that the coworker saw her essentially talking to nobody. I also follow science stuff as much as I can, especially now that we're getting into quantum entanglement, consciousness, etc. I've never been religious, but over the last year plus, I've been reminded that the fact that we exist, that life exists at every opportunity, presents an incredible mystery beyond any we can currently fathom. Anyway, my wife mentioned a post from the sub to me, part of a recurring trend of posts about children telling their parents about their past lives. I discovered that there were a few others somewhat similar. People seconds away from deadly car crashes, or actually remembering the crashes, then waking up and avoiding the turn, etc. Of course, it's still all anecdotal, so who really knows? But really interesting nonetheless. So we get to talking about this stuff. She's been working remotely throughout the past 2 years, and I've been left with not much focus besides the world on fire, and a lot of time to wonder and follow all this stuff and collect data. So as we're talking about it all, the nature of consciousness, the quantum stuff, the time crystal, etc., my field of vision flickered twice. I'm used to momentary power drops and stuff from living in different places, but this wasn't like that. It was like everything around flashed to nothingness for a split second as we were talking about this stuff. I should have said something to her, but didn't, and really regret that. But it was as if, while we were focusing on these possibilities, my reality snapped to nothingness twice, in maybe the span of a minute or two. I'm aware it could be purely psychological, but it was still weird as hell. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since, wondering if anyone else has experienced something similar. Case notes. So yes, this has happened to other people. I've actually narrated a few stories where people are in their homes or in their cars and people around them also experience it. So the fact that your wife didn't, or maybe she did and also didn't mention anything, people often compare it to the sun just going completely black for a split second or maybe a second. But in some cases, the sound disappears too in that brief period of time. It's like everything simply stops processing. I often bring it up, but it's like playing an MMO and the client-side info not processing, so everything freezes up. But then I think it's more like the monitor stopping to receive information, and the speakers too. So if we are in an MMORPG, a game we all chose to play, but a hyper-realistic one, then there's a central server that's processing all the behind-the-scenes stuff. Then there's a client that's displaying all the graphics for us and stuff like that. But then the client has to transmit that data to the receptors, the monitor, or in this case, however we're connected to the game. It still needs to receive that data. So maybe there's a tiny glitch sometimes, not often. It doesn't even affect everyone, at least as far as we know. Hasn't happened to me yet. That data stream is interrupted for a tiny amount of time, but enough to notice. Bonus file, written by 1987 Raph. It wouldn't be that surprising if a prison ended up being haunted, would it? I'm a prison officer, not a storyteller, so this may be either really long and boring or full of information that's irrelevant, but I think you'll enjoy. We start our nights at approximately 8 p.m. and are locked in until the following morning at 6 a.m. It's essentially a skeleton crew and several hundred prisoners secured behind their doors. This week has been the most activity that I have ever experienced, and a lot of my colleagues who worked had spooky happenings as well. I'm not really a believer per se. However, a lot of spooky unexplained stuff happened that night, and I have no choice but to begin to believe when it's added all up together. I'll start off with some personal backstory and my experiences, and then this week's activity. At night, we usually patrol 2 linked wings as there's no need to have staff patrolling each wing when the prisoners are asleep. There's a wing that I believe is haunted. On the 3rd landing, when cutting in between the 2 wings, there's a sudden feeling of being watched by something from the corner. It freaks me out so much. I refuse to cut through there now, as I just feel cold and watched. I go the longer way around to access that particular landing if I have to answer a cell bell. It's the same on the 1st landing, on the same wing. As soon as you come down the stairs and turn to carry on the patrol, there's another horrible, oppressive feeling of being followed that gives me the heebie-jeebies. I have had emergency cell bells used by prisoners to alert staff to an emergency, go off on cells that are not occupied. Random doors slam when all the doors, apart from toilet, staff room, and office doors, are locked for obvious reasons. And also thought I've seen movement on CCTV cameras when I'm on my own. I've also heard things. However, anyone who has either been in prison or worked in one will know they are noisy, even at night. I have never said anything about this to colleagues because being a prison officer, dealing with hardened criminals, and being spooked by nothing is a surefire way to get the mick taken out of you. Fast forward to this week. Luckily, I was not on this wing and was a member of staff that walks around supporting patrolling staff. I spooked a patrol on a random wing as they didn't hear me, and I made a joke about whether they thought I was a ghost. We got talking about ghosts and stuff, and naturally, the subject of this wing came up. My face must have said it all, because they said, "Don't tell me the 3s as you cut through, and the 1s as you come off the stairs." This is spooky that someone else has felt the same, but also a little bit relieving that it's not just me who feels it. I carried on with my rounds and chatted to people and got talking about my good jump scare in our chat. It turns out that a lot of people who work in prisons believe in ghosts after working night shifts. One of the patrols told me that they also called me to sit with them as they heard a loud bang as though it was a cell door slamming shut. They went and investigated and nothing was there. They had just sat back down and it went again. This obviously spooked them. We began talking about how it's weird that ghosts have been mentioned and that happens. He then had his own story about the wing I think is haunted, where one of the metal security gates slammed shut behind him on the 3's landing as he was cutting through one night. Now, having worked on this wing, that gate doesn't move on its own as it's heavy, let alone slam behind anyone of its own accord. We have a laugh about being blokes and scared of shadows, and I crack on with seeing the next person. To access them, I have to go through a wooden door and a metal gate. It's pitch black and I don't have my torch, so I open the wooden door and then the metal gate and step in to look for the light switch so I can see to lock the door and gate behind me. As I'm doing this, the wooden door slams shut directly behind me with a huge force. I jumped. It wasn't a windy night, and we are indoors, so no breeze or anything. Let me tell you, I have never shut some doors and gates so fast in my life. I spend my rounds talking about the ghosts and seeing what everyone's stories are, and there are interesting stories, but everyone I speak to talks about this haunted wing and either the 3s where they feel like they're being watched or the 1s as they come off the stairs. These are all mentioned. By this point, I had spoken to 6 staff and all of them said the same thing. That's too much of a coincidence for me. I finally go into the haunted wing and I'm talking to the patrol who has all the lights on for what I can now only assume is the obvious, as they have felt it too. And I swear, I see someone moving on the cameras on the ones, walking towards the office just before they go out of camera. Nothing there and nothing on the playback. Hope you enjoyed my ramblings.